Hello, welcome to Walpole United WFC. Hello and welcome to Walpole United with me, John Foster, MUFC. Slightly different show tonight. We're doing something a little bit different because we're talking about women in football, women who have footballing careers, whether it be on the pitch or off the pitch. So to help me talk about that, we've got some good guests tonight. Andy, how are you doing, mate?
Not too bad, not too bad. I love how you just did the whole women in football thing and went for the non-woman on the panel. So you want to start with that.
Well, the good thing is we do actually have women on the panel to be able to discuss this in a bit more detail. So welcome back, Catherine. How are you?
I'm good.
What time is it over there at the moment?
It's 3 o'clock in the afternoon, hence why the sun is setting.
Yeah, it's pitch
and
black.
It's minus 22 out.
No way.
Yeah,
Really?
no, it's been freezing cold this week. Literally, my cat loves to go outside, and I just opened the door, and she just went and didn't even bother, just turned around and was like, I'm over this. It's freezing here in Montreal.
I'm assuming snow as well.
It's too cold for snow at this point. When you get below the minus 20s, I'm sorry, we're veering into weather, the greatest conversation on earth. When you get too cold, you just don't have enough moisture in the air for snow. But there is snow outside. Just freezing cold snow.
It was -1 here today, and I had to de-ice my car, and that was cold. I got my big woolly hat on and a big scarf, gloves. That was -1. -22 is something out of the ordinary. Ashlea, thank you for joining us. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for having me on as well. I'm really grateful to be here and get to help out with a few things.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it was your article that made me do something out of the ordinary. I mean, Andy's known me a long time. It's not a kind of show that I would tend to do. I'd usually leave this for Matt or Natalie, but when I read it, I thought, well, let's at least discuss it a little bit. So, first of all, Ashlea, it is your first time on the channel. We're going to be discussing your journalism kind of stuff that you're getting into. But it's not just journalism that you do as well. You are a player. So do you want to just talk us a little bit about what you do away from journalism?
So away from journalism at uni, I kind of play football for Stourbridge Ladies Development Side. We're a good bunch of girls, really enjoy it. I enjoy playing with all of them. We're all really supportive. We all push one another to be better. And obviously we have the first team to look up to in terms of the standard we need to be at, or to be ready to help out them if they need us at any point. So it's really good. There's a good setup there. So hopefully it can continue for the next few years, and hopefully there'll be more people like me coming through as well. So
it is a fantastic setup, and as soon as we put that tweet out that you'll be coming on the show, the Stourbridge Ladies Twitter page jumped straight on it to support you, and I think that's what they do with that club. The social media guy, Richard, is great anyway, but I think that your Twitter account, the Stourbridge Twitter account, is fantastic for a Tier 5 team. How interactive it is, it's great to see. So we're going to talk a little bit about your article. So it was to do with the first female referee to officiate a men's football game. I think it was back in October last year. Was that to do with a uni project that you did, or did you just kind of decide to take it upon yourself to write that?
Well, I was always going to think of doing a bit about it anyway, because it was such a landmark role for a female referee, an all-female team to take charge of an England national game for the first time ever. And but then we got assigned a uni. It was part of my uni assignment that I submitted the other day, where we had to interview someone, and we had to do an interview piece. So I thought I'll tie it all together by doing the bit that I wanted to do and get in contact with a female referee by putting a post out on Facebook. And then she messaged me privately, saying I'm willing to help you, what do you want me to do and stuff. And then she answered the questions that I sent her, kind of thing. So it was a bit of both, bit of interest, and then added on top of uni too.
And did you just jump in there, because I could talk for quite a while on this, because being a bit of an aspiring journalist, if I had more time, I would do a lot more journalism, but obviously spend a bit more time on YouTube than I do writing these days. So, Andy, if you just want to ask a question or two first, and then I'll come back into it.
Yeah, no, definitely. I was just thinking about what you say about publicising Stourbridge. Being from Manchester, we all actually know where that is now. So you've done a massive thing, and obviously I was there. I've been down, haven't I? There before the Birmingham away game for Man United women. We were there obviously to watch as well. Yeah, I mean, obviously, first of all, congratulations on the article. I mean, I think it's it's a very good article as well. I mean, what do you think that the challenges are for the female referees at the moment? Because there is quite a groundswell of them in the WSL now. I think it's quite rare for you to see actually male refs in the WSL, which is a good thing. Do you think they're just not getting that support to move up a bit, or they're getting sort of stuck doing the WSL in that regard?
I think it's hard because there's a big difference between the men and the women's game in general. I mean, I know it's still football and it's still the same rules. But I think there is still a difference, and I feel like having a female ref do a men's game was a landmark thing. I just feel like the amount of criticism the refs get in the Championship or the Premier League, especially at the moment, I feel like they wouldn't want to introduce. I don't know. With the linesman, I know there's is it Sean Massey-Ellis, the lines girl who does a lot of Premier League. I know she gets a lot of criticism at times. I've been at a match where she's got a bit of criticism. And I remember the Aguero thing when he apparently said something to her or something like that. And I just feel like that's probably why there isn't so many women getting involved with it too much, because I think they're scared of putting them in there to get so much abuse, because you see the abuse that the referees get now, like Mike Dean especially, and Michael Oliver and people like that. They get a lot of abuse, but then I suppose the only way you could do it is try them out, see what it's like, and if they don't do a very good job, then maybe don't move them up so quickly. But when I watched Rebecca Welch, she did the Birmingham Plymouth game the weekend, and I thought she did quite a good job. I don't think she didn't get anything majorly wrong when I watched like certain bits of it. So I think it's just one of them. I think eventually they will get in. I think it's just a matter of time. But I think they've got to find a way to reduce it so they don't get a load of criticism all the time, because I feel like if the men are getting it, the women are just going to get even more kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen obviously on the men's channel, we had Amy from Her Game Too, the campaign that's going on at the moment to try and reduce sexism both in the men's and the women's game. And I think I agree. I think unfortunately they would get a lot more criticism. But as you say, there's a lot of girls, female refs that can definitely step up to the plate. I mean, it's funny. It might surprise a lot of people me being on this show, because out of anybody who's on our channel, I do go in a lot on the refs. But I think, honestly, when you find out that the highest grade ref that can ref a WSL, male or female, is the same kind of ref who can ref League Two only, is the highest they can go. So there is possibly a point there that, with Sky Sports and with they're doing Ref Watch now, like they do with the Premier League Pognal refs that are on $75,000 a year. You're getting people that are much earlier in the career getting properly scrutinised to a very high level, and and I'd like to see more referees get the opportunities to move up the men's pyramid, but also to get some of the higher level referees in the men to come across to the women's as well, because I think, as fans, it can be quite quick, can't it, to jump and shout at the referee. But to be honest, the amount of times that I've seen a referee possibly realise there's something wrong, look to their lines person, and the lines person is even less qualified than they are, looks scared to death and doesn't help them. So, it's like, don't look at me, and the whole thing is about it being a team, isn't it? So, yeah, I think that's a good point. I think hopefully if we can, bring more people through, it might get them higher up the pyramid as well, because they're kind of being set up for a fail at the moment in the WSL, I think.
It's not a situation that's unique to the WSL. Like in the NWSL, refereeing has been a source of contention for years now, because they get the same level. They get grade 2 and grade 3 refs to ref a professional league. And the only reason is because they're not rated high enough to actually get the same types of refs as in the MLS. And we had situations this past year where, like, games literally went out of control. There was a game with the Chicago Red Stars where I think they lost 3 or 4 players to injury because like the tackles that were being brought in weren't being called, and the people that ended up getting carded were the Red Star coaches because they were just losing their mind seeing what was going on with their players. I think it's also important to remember how far we've come when it comes to refereeing. Like this was always going to be an area that possibly lagged because of the amount of years that it takes to gain the experience to get to like a Premier League or a FIFA level referee. Like this doesn't happen overnight, and the introduction of pathways for women in refereeing is quite new. It was like 10 years ago that Andy Gray got fired because of his comments about a female linesman not knowing, and this was perfectly acceptable, or not perfectly acceptable, he got fired, but this was quite normal talk, and she was very much the exception, almost like a unicorn. What are you doing there? You're a female. Whereas now we wouldn't bat our eyes twice, but like when it comes to women and the women's game, we need to get a greater level of professionalism at the top, because what we're seeing right now is this stuck in between. Like it's professional enough that they know what they're doing, but they can't get to that next level where I think in the women's game we're satisfied and players are satisfied. And I would argue maybe refs are satisfied with the level of decision making and the level of support for them.
Do you think it's that, because obviously we've always benefited from your views on this being obviously from Canada, but do you think it's that British disease of not looking at how other countries are doing it as well? Because when I was preparing for this a little bit, I was thinking of obviously Stephanie Rapport, the French referee that was given some quite senior European games in the men's. I think she refereed the Super Cup final last year. I'm assuming she got to that level at some point. Maybe there should be more dialogue across associations about how she got to such a level, because I think she's
in the last year with the introduction of Bibiane, the German referee who did something quite similar in the Bundesliga. I think you're actually starting to get an advance of other nations when it comes to refereeing. Like you've already set up a division within the Professional Refereeing Association, and to deal with the women's game and to try to professionalize the women's game, and hired an expert to kind of oversee it. But this isn't something that's going to be resolved overnight. And I, without having that much information, I do wonder, like, is there what the pay inequity is between the women and the men's leagues when it comes to it? You know, I know that I reffed myself. I got more abuse than a lot of the, especially when I was a teenager, because I looked like I was 12 until I was about 18. But I got a lot of abuse, even though I had a badge and everything. And it was a little bit insane, because you actually got paid the same until you got to the senior level, where suddenly, if you were more qualified, to ref like men or girls or women, sorry, like you actually got paid less to ref women, which I thought was a little bit crazy. But if you went to where you got paid more, where it was actually financially worthwhile continuing with this as I gained experience and had another job, like the level of abuse that was kind of that I received as a linesman and in the center compared sometimes to my male counterparts was just disproportionate. And so if it's not financially viable to put your body, to make sure that you have, like to make sure that your body is capable of actually dealing with men or dealing with the game, and to keep up with female athletes nowadays, like I'm wondering if this might be also one of the problems with women in refereeing, that we might lose a lot of women because it's just not financially worth their while to have this second, very demanding, very scrutinized, and sometimes very like you can like,
thankless is the word. Is you thinking possibly?
Yeah. No, I'm thinking even worse than that. Like you can literally be abused. Like you're constantly. I got abused by like parents at 7 matches. Like you're abused throughout. Like why would you do that if it's not financially worth your while? Especially when you get to a point where you start having another career, which is probably where you're also competent enough to ref at this level. Anyway,
I was just looking a bit at Stephanie's stuff while you were talking there, and yeah, she's apparently been reffing the top league in France for the Men League One since 2019, and obviously got the Women's World Cup final and the European Super Cup. So, and you're right. I mean, I even saw some like semi-patronising commentators going, went with the European Super Cup. Oh, look, she can keep up with play. Like, I know there is a difference in the sense of, on paper, statistically between, male runners and female runners, but it's evident that obviously that's something she'll be able to keep up with. But I think in that experience.
If I'm going to be honest, like, I found, like, being in the center, you run a lot more, but where it was more difficult, especially for the men, refereeing, was actually on the line, because that's where you have to be able to have the physical level to sprint and to keep up with the offside line. But in the center, it's a lot more about having the stamina to constantly be running, but also the knowledge of where to put yourself so that you are in position and almost to anticipate, am I in the good position to pick up what might happen in the box without interfering? Like, that's something that takes years of experience to learn. But like the physicality, I found it was actually more physically demanding to be on the line, because when those sprints come in, it could be really difficult to keep up while doing your job of actually looking at offside line. Anyway, I'm talking like 10 years ago, so I would not be able to do it nowadays.
Just ask a question of Ashley as well. Obviously, you say you're playing football for Stourbridge at the moment. Is refereeing something you'd like to go into at some point, or is it just football at the minute and you might look at that later, or is it not something you'd be interested in?
To be fair, I've always wanted to go into football, but I don't think I'm like never going to make it as a player. I kind of don't want to be a professional player. That's not what I've aimed to be. Refereeing, I did look at it at one point. But then when I went to uni and started my course, I was kind of set like, I want to become a journalist or some form of, not even if it's with football, because I'm interested in pretty much every sport going, and I'm willing to learn new sports like rugby. I like rugby, but I don't understand it. So I'm kind of like, I'm ready to challenge myself and learn new things as well. But I just want to go into some form of sports journalism role where, I can enjoy it and I can say I'm doing a job that I enjoy, which is the next best thing to playing in the sport that you love, kind of thing.
And I just want to bring you back to something that Ashley mentioned earlier. And I think you've mentioned it a few times to me, either on a podcast or through a voice note. Ashley kind of hinted earlier when she spoke, where she was saying that like the female refs may be a bit more protected because of the abuse that they may get. Now, I know that we've had conversations before, Andy, about why should they be any more protected than, like, I guess, like a male, for example. Why should, they're not children, so to speak. I just wanted to throw that back out there, because we as United fans, we kind of boo a little bit.
I was about to say, before let Catherine come in, remind me not to let you do my PR, because that's not what I said, but I'll be able to correct the record. So
because that was a kind of where you was kind of going to go. And they could correct it first, and then obviously Catherine come in.
No, I'll let Catherine go.
Okay.
I'd say, like, when we have the introduction of women in areas that have been dominated by men, it's important to have a gendered outlook at the effects of the job that the job can have on them. And when it comes to female referees, like, it's not about protecting them more. It's about having an understanding about the differentiated level of, like, the different abuse that they can get, how they can be targeted. And without having ever done any academic study on this, I would venture to guess that they probably get different things yelled at them, different abuse, different levels. And that has to be part of the treatment to protect not just women referees and men's referees, but if you're wanting to protect referees from abuse, you have to look at the statistics and go, okay, well, are they being targeted in the same manner? Because if you take one approach to try to protect your employees, if the abuse is different, you're not going to be successful at really protecting either. Anyway, that's my own.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I touched on it earlier, where like it probably comes up from an element of experience and exposure and analysis and being reflected. Obviously a massive WSL game now, you're going to get quite a few thousand people there. Obviously, even some of the big games, like the game we had at the Etihad, in the first year of our WSL. Again, you had a female referee who would have been maximum level 5 reffing in the Premier League stadium with 55,000 people. And that's what I mean about setting them up for a haul to an extent, because I suppose by the time you're reffing week in, week out, full stadiums or half full stadiums, you've probably got a lot more experience than obviously the levels of referees that we get within the WSL. And so I definitely agree that has to be a consideration there, because if you're not, you can't go from refereeing 200 people last week to refereeing at the Etihad with 55,000 people. Or the women's, or Rebecca Welsh obviously done the Women's World Cup, done the FA Cup final for the women, where it was, again, quite a few thousand, I mean, was it 20, 30,000 people? And it's the national stadium, so there's a lot of pressure there. So I definitely think there's more support, and maybe we'll probably pivot on to another point that was in Ashlea's article, which was obviously you quoted Mark Clattenburg, who is, one of those referees that was I'm not a men's fan, full disclosure. I don't watch the male game at all, but even I know who he was. A lot of the people kind of put him in the same category as Pierluigi Collina, one of the ones that people liked as a decent referee. And yet he then uses his, as you say, extensive position as quite a well-known retired referee to just say something utterly asinine that probably would struggle to be acceptable in the mid-1980s in a bar, rather than in 2022 or 2021 as it would have been then. I mean, obviously, how unhelpful is it when not only comments are made like that, but it's almost accepted in that respect, isn't it? That's an acceptable view, because it certainly isn't. I mean, you couldn't say it about race or other protected characteristics.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
You're talking the pregnancy comment?
Yeah.
I mean, I think this is a indicative of a greater problem that we have in society with regards to, like, I grew up in a generation where I don't know a single woman who didn't expect to work her entire life, but at the same time we all wanted children, and we'd scratch our head and go, like, how do we do both? Because society isn't set up for that. And also you still do get comments of people seeing pregnancy, having children as a problem that exists for women, as if somehow this is going to be something
like there isn't any male involvement in the process.
No, but as if somehow, like, this is something that means that they have to stop whatever they're doing because suddenly they either have a child or whereas it's a completely natural thing. It's something that arguably after you have the baby, we need to have more protections for women and men to be able to take care of their children and have the right to take care of their children, which isn't assured everywhere. But to me, that's a problem that's greater in society, where we still hear these comments of like, oh, well, what if she gets pregnant? Well, what if she gets pregnant? We need a future generation. This is part of life. And if you're not an obstetrician, you shouldn't be commenting on the capacity of a woman's body to get pregnant and then get back to shape. That's not, like, you have no right to comment on that anyway.
Yeah, and I saw it was an interview with TalkSport, and it wasn't like it was like he was shooting the breeze. He wasn't like, making a particularly, I've got to be careful what I'm saying here kind of thing. He felt it was a kind of a acceptable thing to say. I
think this is like the type of dinosaur talk, the same as Andy Gray's "Do women know the offside rule" when it comes to referee? Like, these are things that have been said a lot that I have heard that are no longer acceptable in society, but there are parts of society who don't know that, who haven't had an education that this is no longer acceptable. I don't know if you guys agree, but
yeah, I mean, I think, and just to say what John was attempting to allude to earlier, what I think, as you say, you kind of almost answered it. You need it to be, as you say, female voices and allies to bring people through. What I wouldn't want is like an altruistic dear lady attitude of like, oh, she can't deal with that. Where in reality, she might be able to deal with that level of. So I suppose it's more, where does that voice come from? Certainly, as you say, the correct support and maybe more elements of support might be needed. But what I wouldn't want to see is an element of just an assumption that referee can't deal with that abuse because she's a woman, rather than it be an experience issue or a kind of situation, because obviously that isn't the case.
Well, I think, like, I don't know if you'd mind me, like, kind of going to the greater topic that we had also highlighted, like, the answer to that is balance. And by balance, I mean, we need more women and men working together so that these types of topics and these barriers and these assumptions get broken down, because people know each other better, because they're working side by side, but also they're getting equal opportunity to advance in their careers. Like, until you truly have equal pathways and greater integration, some of these attitudes are going to keep festering, because if you don't have interaction with, for example, if male referees don't have a lot of interaction with female, how would they know? How, like, these assumptions that have been in society will just, I mean, this is a greater societal problem, but these assumptions will just keep festering. And like, I would argue that this applies to referees as well as journalism, as well as many areas in football where it comes to women still being a very, very small minority of those working.
No, definitely.
There's just one more point I just wanted to make on the article that Ashley wrote, and it was quite surprising actually that the number over 2,000 referees are female, but obviously it took this long to be able to get one to referee a men's game. First of all, Ashley, just your thoughts on that number, because over 2,000 refs seem to be, you know, it's quite a massive number if you think of, you know, the amount of people that actually is, but only one of them has managed to get into referee that men's game back in October. Just what are your thoughts on that number? And I'd want to hear Andy's point of view on why he thinks maybe it's taken either this long, or what's gone wrong with the other 2,000 in the sense of why haven't they been chose? So Ash, obviously to start off with yourself, mate, what are your thoughts on 2,000 referees being female?
I think it's good because it's such a big number. But then you look at how many, like Catherine was saying about the balance, you look at the men's, how many men's referees there is in the world. Like, I could only name a set few female, like, well-known ones, like Rebecca Welch. I know she probably hasn't reffed, I don't think, but Sean Massielis as the lineswoman in the Premier League, and then the French ref that Andy mentioned as well. Like, there are only a set few that I could name. I recognise people, like the Women's World Cup was a big breakthrough when I watched it a couple of years ago. And it was the England-Cameroon game that stood out for me when there was VAR. It was the first time VAR had ever been used at the women's game. They were trialling it. And the referee that did that game, she handled VAR really well. She dealt with everything. And then when you say there's only 2,000 referees, I think it was the UK number. I can't remember if I said it was the world or the UK. But either way, and then for only one to be given the higher standard compared to everyone else, it is a bit shocking. But you have to probably take into account how many of those are like younger women as well, like 17, 18-year-olds who have probably just started. Like, I know one of the girls who I used to play with recently left the club. Beck, she was doing refereeing quite a lot, and she was doing like younger girls matches, maybe a couple of lads games, I think, as well. And like, she was working her way up. So whether she still continues it, I hope she does. But like, you have to consider younger people. But I'm just hoping, I think it's the balance, like going back to Catherine, but I'm just hoping eventually, as I get older, my friends who do refereeing, they get older, and then the younger generation get older, hopefully more of them will push themselves and challenge themselves a little bit further to get better, kind of thing as well. So
you see, you said that you think 2,000 is a lot, and maybe this is a very Canadian thing, but I think I was shocked by that number. I mean, just to give you like a difference in the playing representation of girls in Canada, but girls are almost 45% of those who play soccer in this country. So at the youth level, you see as much of them as you see of boys. So when I was recruited to ref, about half those who went to do the course were also girls. I started at 14 years old, and I know the head ref of the city where I played, and he actually preferred girls for the younger referees because he found they were more mature than the 14-year-old boys that might show up. But his greatest problem was retention, and the retention was two things. It was, the abuse that girls often got compared to the boys was significantly greater. And it was also like, when you get to the higher levels, like, are you going to be compensated equally to do the same job, but you're going for women, and you're like, it's the exact same. Like, to me, refereeing a women in a men's match at the end of the day might be the exact same thing. You're in the center, you're running for 90 minutes, but you're getting a fraction of the price to ref that same game. And you're going like, well, is this worth my time? Is it worth my while? Yeah. So I think it starts in recruitment, because Like 2,000 seems really low to me. And I'm wondering if it's because there's just less girls in the UK that play comparative to boys, that they just have never seen that as an avenue of recruitment. Anyway, I'll stop digressing.
Randy?
Yeah, I mean, I'd probably throw obviously the question to Ashley there. I mean, is it something that you even realize what is a career? I know that you want to go into journalism, but is it something that you were aware of that you could? I mean, at the moment, I suppose technically it isn't, because they're not full time. They just get paid a very small amount from the FA. But is it something that you consider is something that you could have wanted to have done? If you could have done if you wanted to.
I feel like I probably would have. I mean, I knew you could get your like refereeing. I think it's like your ref badges, or you go through your course to be a ref. But I never really knew it was something that you could pursue a lot further until I read about the FA and their plan to get even more girls refereeing and to push it further. I didn't really ever think this is something I could ever go into and things like that. So I don't know. I knew it was a career, but I never thought I could get far, as in like, which you don't see many women do get far. So that's probably why I never considered it to be like, yeah, I want to do this in the future.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, as fans of the WSL on the playing side, it's very inspiring to see a lot of these, players and the way the women's game is growing up, and is going up and going from strength to strength. But there are also, we've discussed in other shows, gaping issues and a lot of papering over massive cracks in relation to financial stability and salaries. And is the WSL actually full time when you work out how much money they get paid? I mean, Catherine, you mentioned with some territories in the NWSL aren't enough to actually live on. So does that class as full time?
The majority, like 70% of NWSL players last year made 30,000 or less, which if you're living in New York, Washington, Seattle, Portland, like this is not enough money to have a living wage.
Yeah, and I think that's what we've got to guard against, is because we're obviously all passionate for the women's game and growing women's sport in general. But there is a few people of, well, we've given you this money, aren't we brilliant? And you're like, I think the FA to an extent did a victory tour, being the first full-time league that came about, and then you had Yeovil, then you've had commentary in the second division, then you've had all these other massive issues, and Birmingham's not got much money. There's loads and loads of issues, but they're still going around going, yeah, but we've got the full-time league, and they're not. And
the reality is the only reason they could really float this were the first full time is because the NWSL paid so little when they first started. Actually, the first season the NWSL started, the minimum salary was $6,500 for 6 months' work, which in pounds is like less than 4,000 pounds. Like it's about 4,000 pounds for 6 months' worth. I don't know who could survive on that, which is why most players have 2 jobs anyway.
Yeah, well, this is it, and then yet they're being measured against their male counterparts that are purely and utterly athletes. And as you say, if you're having to do a job and also play, whereas you've got another lot, they're getting a lot more money, can have a lot more support, a lot more training. It's not a fair measurement, really.
I think at this point, it's 2 different factors. Like the first is we have to understand that this is still a league and a sport that's in a growth, but we also have to realize that if we want to keep the best talent within the league, they have to be making a living wage. If not, they will retire. Those who are the backbone of your league will retire prematurely because you can't keep living doing 2 demanding things, trying to make a living and being a professional footballer. And that trickles down everywhere, where at some point, like sport takes time if you're involved in it. And if at one point it becomes a financial problem, like maybe for referees, then you're not going to get the best people staying within it.
It's funny as well, because just broadening the conversation a little bit as well to a diversity element in general. I mean, on paper, the women's game is seen as more like LGBTQ plus friendly in relation to that. And it is, as an LGBT person myself, I'm, very well comfortable, and I've been all around the country now and pretty much with the women's game, and I've never had any homophobic abuse or anything like that in the women's environment. But I think maybe, possibly people are patting themselves a bit on the back on that and not focusing on some of the more fundamental elements, which is like obviously sexism and that element to it, to ensure that the players, the female journalists, the refs get the chance to develop as well and not be set up by a fall, as I say, be assessed assessed in such a way where, you know, as I said, I keep going back to that Sky Sports where they got the big thing and they can slow it down, and, you know, and they're looking at technically a level 5 ref, and they're comparing using the same technology that they'll use for Manchester United men against Liverpool men, you know, with a referee that's on 75 grand a year that all he has to do is ref, and this person's being looked at with the same microscope.
I think it's a balance. We have to look like this is still a league. There are certain things that might take a few years. You know, refs, you know, to get refs to the level where we want them to be, you need to have more than 2,000 refs coming through the pipeline. If the majority of the refs you're going to be getting are women, to get the quality that you need ultimately, it's a balancing act. It's realizing that this is something still in its growth stage, while at the same time going, you know, we have to be accountable and we have to require equality to be the goal, not in 10 years, but really soon. I think Jess Fishlock said it the best. She said, there's not a single female footballer who is stupid. We know we'll never make 100,000 a week, and we're not asking that. We're just asking that on and off the field, everything else be the same. And that should be the goal. It should be that we do not have differential standards if you're a woman with regards to fields, with regards to the treatment, with regards to medical treatment, and with regards to refs. That should be the ultimate goal. Just
dipping on the medical treatment, I remember reading about the complete lack of knowledge. Apparently, when Siobhan Chamberlain was pregnant, the Man United physios were essentially learning from her. They had apparently other people in the league came over to look on how do we deal with a pregnant player and how does that work? And that's ridiculous in 2021 that there isn't much data on that.
That's a greater problem in medicine too. The female anatomy is often, there's a great book by Christina, I'll tell you her name, but about how the world is essentially designed for men, and often women are just, it's not designed for women. And in medicine, often something that would seem very obvious, like how female athletes will be different to male athletes, female are seen as the woman is seen as the divergent, as the minority, when in fact we're not.
You know? Yeah, and I think the other element was with ACL injuries. Apparently, physiologically, it's more likely to happen to female players than male players. But there's been literally little or no research towards that. It's also more likely to happen during periods of menstruation as well. Yeah. And again, no one's really looked at that. And there seems to be we seem to be getting more professional in relation to, as you say, physios and WSL. And again, I know that Man United women get access to Carrington and all the medical facilities that the rest of the men have, and that kind of thing. But then we also still have stories where, like with Beth Mead, who had to delete that tweet, where they're given male training kits for some reason as a mistake.
Well, even women are often required to work in men's boots, and our hips aren't lined up in the same manner as men. So that could actually turn out your hips and actually aggravate ACL problems. This is one of the theories of should we be designing boots for women being, by the way, the book is Invisible Women by Caroline Criado Perez. And I really suggest reading it, because a lot of this is things that I kind of already see, but when you read it, you see the extent of it. Anyway.
We'll move on to a little bit regarding off the pitch then. So obviously we spoke about careers on the pitch, but how about off the pitch? So obviously, Catherine, you're involved in that. Ashley, you will hopefully be involved in that. How about other things in the media, like punditry, working on TV, things like that? First of all, Catherine, obviously you did mention privately about partly some of your thoughts on players turning into commentating or punditry. Do you want to just open up that question, and then obviously I'll bring that into Ashley and see what she thinks of that as well?
Well, my opinion on this goes beyond, actually, the majority of my opinion on this is actually based on the men's game. So it goes a lot more beyond the women's game, but it's that I don't necessarily think that a panel of pundits filled entirely with ex-players brings the best product when it comes to analysis and when it comes to discussion, in part because while they may be experts as players, their lived experience is very similar. A really good example of it was, if you looked at Emma Hayes this summer and you put her beside two male pundits, when she started speaking, she would elevate the discussion to a level that I don't think they could contribute in that manner. And while Hayes had played in the past, I don't think that what she brought was because of her playing days. I think it was because of like the 15 years that she evolved as a coach, excluding the last couple of years at Chelsea, where she wasn't just the head coach. She was also the kit man and the travel person and the psychiatrist and the analysis. She had to do so many things that she acquired skills from everywhere. Like being a pundit, like being a journalist, or like many jobs, is a specialty. And just because you're an ex-player, it doesn't necessarily mean that you'll be good at it. So I say this more on having seen a lot. Sometimes you see punditry that is just men that used to play the sport, and they seem to always be kind of reassuring each other's opinions when you can see that there's a lot more topics that can happen. And to be fair, I've also seen it on the women's side. The last World Cup here in Canada, we had punditry that was all female, which is great because I've never seen that before. But 3 out of the 4 people were ex-Canadian players, 2 of which had recently retired. And so often when they spoke, they kind of spoke it from the same echo chamber, this like Canadian women's national team, which isn't necessarily bad, but there are times you could see that there were discussions that were missed, or maybe discussions that were amplified because they just spoke with this one voice. And anyway, I'm kind of diverging, but like, I think it's good to see ex-players, especially ex-female players, have a pathway past playing where they can remain in the sport and contribute to the sport. But I don't necessarily think that all pundits should necessarily be athletes. And I think sometimes when you look at some panels, you may be missing an aspect of discussion that could come through because you only have athletes.
I mean, it talks about that goes back to coaches, doesn't it, as well, about the lack of opportunities for female coaches and managers in the men's game. And, them being almost I've already had people have had discussions about could Emma Hayes manage in the men's? Of course she could. Yeah. It's not a different language to speak to women and men. Like, could Jurgen Klopp manage Liverpool women? Yes, he could. But for some reason, it's more of a genuine discussion point the other way around.
I think this still exists. I used to work in the aviation industry. I used to be a pilot, and like, I
can't wait for your biography. You got something like you had an eclectic life with a referee and a journalist. I'm very interested.
In my career, I flew with 3 female captains. The rest were all men. And this discussion came over time and time and time again. And the reality is, it doesn't make a difference if the pilot is like the airplane doesn't care about your gender. It cares about your qualities and your experience and your analysis to actually be able to do your job. I think these discussions only come about in areas that are heavily dominated by one gender. And the same that, like, can a man really be as good at nursing as a woman? Of course he can, if his heart is in it, if he's trained properly, and if that's what he want to do. I think this is a general, again, I keep bringing it to broader society, but like, this is a problem that we have in society where with employment that is dominated by one gender, where we suddenly think it's appropriate to start questioning whether the other gender could have the qualifications to do it if they are fully qualified already. It's very bizarre, in my opinion.
I mean, do you think it's to the element of, like, in relation to when things are being analysed, it's a situation where the female ref, the female manager, the female pundit has to, as you say, in people's eyes, prove they deserve to be in the room before they can actually excel? Whereas the male equivalent can just already, the assumption is of course you can be, and then we'll see how you are when we put the camera on. Whereas they have to sort of like prove, that, and there's an element of, I think I've even seen some of the more on the men's side, but like actually, Alex Scott was really good. Like, it was a surprise. Oh, actually, because the default assumption is she's going to be terrible. And I think until we change that default assumption, we might be still in this quagmire, really.
I think especially when the woman is, or when any gender is in an area where they're outnumbered by their opposite gender, they tend to have to produce, they can't be the norm. They have to be better, but they certainly cannot be worse. If you are worse, even though the opposite gender might have a lot who are worse than the average, like if you're worse, you're going to get called out. And with regards to punditry, if we're going to flip it, like somebody like Alex Scott doesn't have a choice at this point in time but to be as good or better than her male counterparts, because if not, she will get abused to the point where I wonder if she will be able, like, it might be unfair to say this, but like she's going to get called out and abused to a level that no male pundit would see. So, and I do wonder, like, would she actually get kept on if she was just average, or would they just go on to the next woman?
Ashley, what's your thoughts on that when you start seeing players coming into punditry? Because it's only happened obviously quite recently. Is it like something that's like that you prefer to see? I'm guessing that it's good to have that balance in, like Catherine was saying, it is nice to see one of your players that you've probably like looked up to get on the TV and speak more. But as Catherine rightly said, maybe sometimes there might be a bit of an overload, maybe.
I do enjoy it. Like, I used to watch Alex Scott when I was like younger, and I've met her and stuff. So just to see her on the telly doing quite well, she's doing quite well in other sports as well. Like she did the Olympics not long ago with BBC with Claire Baldwin. Like, and I thought she did a really good job, considering she was speaking about something she didn't know too much about. Olympics is every single sport, and then. But I do agree with what Catherine said as well. I feel like having too many ex-players can be a bad thing at times, whether it be all women or men, whatever. I feel like I remember the Emma Hayes bit as well when she was in the studio with, I can't remember who she was with, but when she was saying them things, like Catherine said, it took the conversation to a different level because she's had all the different previous experiences as a player, coach, and all the other roles that she did have. So, but it is good to see. But then obviously there was the Karen Carney thing that happened as well. When she became a pundit, she went to the Leeds game on Boxing Day or just after Boxing Day. I think it was a couple of years ago. It was Leeds West Brom. And she made a comment about Leeds that was completely a valid point. She wasn't trying to be horrible towards Leeds in any way. And then she got abused and had to delete her Twitter account about it and everything. Just because she made a comment that she's completely entitled to. If a male pundit, for example, Roy Keane made that comment, he probably wouldn't get slated because everyone seems to love Roy Keane when he says something that, seems to be true about whether it be Man U, like I'm sure you guys will know, being Man U fans, Roy Keane says a lot about Man U. But everyone seems to agree with him or not really care. But if a woman said that about Man U, like, I don't know who's Man U manager now, but if Casey Stoney said it at the time for the women, she'd probably get hated on a lot in like punditry and things. But I just think it's good to see, but I still think there needs to be some form of way of keeping people protected, whether it be because Alex Scott's one as well. She's quite diverse because of her race as well. So I feel like not only getting abused for making bad comments, she could get racially abused. And I think they need to find the way to not protect us because it comes with the job. Any job you get criticised in, pretty much whether you're a male or female. But I just feel like it is good to see, but I feel like they're a long way from getting it perfectly right in terms of getting everyone happy and, things like that. Everyone being entitled to their opinion and being remembered, like they can say this whether they're male or female kind of thing.
I mean, the thing about Karen Carney that was even worse is that the Leeds United official Twitter account highlighted a comment. So it was kind of like almost highlighting it and going like putting the dogs on it, basically highlighting it and going, get her kind of thing, which was, I don't even think they even actually apologized for ever doing that. And I mean, if anyone listens to Karen in the WSL coverage, she knows her stuff extensively. Possibly she's the exception that proves the rule about ex-players, because when you listen to her talk about tactics, she sounds like she should have been a manager from day one and not a player. Like, she's extremely strong, but it does prove the point that it made. It's more rare to have that than, as you said, like a harmonious.
My thing with pundits and ex-players is like a pundit is a job, and just because you're an ex-player doesn't mean you'll succeed at that job. in the same way that just because you weren't an Olympics player doesn't mean you like it's a job that you have to learn and that you get better at. But there are some people who are, and if all you're doing is putting famous faces on, I don't necessarily think that raises the discussion. Like, I also think, like, you know, you were saying, like, they highlighted her tweet and the level of abuse. Like, to go back to general society, like, female journalists getting abused online is such an epidemic that the UN actually is investigating it right now and put out a whole preliminary report on, like, what they called, like, the cut to public trust because of online media abuse towards female journalists. Like, I've had it happen to myself through what was originally I tried to start a media company with a friend, and literally we were just covering the WNBA draft, and we put the hashtag basketball when the first draft pick came out, and within 3 minutes we started getting what's called dogpiled, like guys from everywhere start like, this isn't basketball, why are you hashtagging this, I don't want to see it on my Twitter feed. When we tried to like block these people because we're like, what is this, we're just covering a draft about basketball, we got dogpiled even more. We didn't even finish the draft, in part because like we were trying to create this media company like independent of our own Twitter accounts so that we could have a platform from which to launch a website. And somebody actually went through what we were doing on Twitter with this Twitter handle, somehow tracked down my partner, and then started doxing her. So literally posting her personal information because she had a unique way of speaking. And she got incredible messages sent to her on her private Twitter, like some that would make what Christian Grey does to Anastasia Steele in 50 Shades of Grey, that would seem like child's play, like suggestions of what they wanted to do. And all we did was report news. So like, I can't, like the lack of protection, like there's this like at the moment, if you want to be a journalist, you have no choice but to have access to online social media, because that is part of how you get your information out. And for some companies, that might be part of why they hire you. But on the other hand, you can be so exposed as a female journalist sometimes for just stating facts. Like, yeah. So if you're stating opinion on top of that, like pundits have a double, like they're double threats because they're women, and on top of that, they're stating not just facts but opinions. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. No, yeah. I mean, I think it's funny because we see it as well with the sort of any time that the main Sky Sports Twitter page highlights a transfer or a contract extension for the female player, you get the "Make Me a Sandwich" brigade that appear, or the sort of but then when challenged, it's on weird technicalities. Oh, it confused me because I thought it was what? No, it didn't. Like, people don't, you know, maybe that shows an element of progress because maybe a short period of time ago, people were going, yeah, because women shouldn't do this. And now they come up with bullshit excuses. And maybe in 10, 15 years, you finally get oh, right, yeah, sorry. But I mean, it's definitely something that I think that is one of those that you know, it's ridiculous. And as you say, you can just block them, and as fans we can block them, but if you're trying to develop a media career,
but the thing is, there's a limit to block. So when we got dogpiled, we tried to block them, and what happened is that they somehow got within their little Twitterverse of misogyny, got other people to come and start attacking us. And the more we blocked, the more we got dogpiled, and then started getting doxxed. Like, the only reason I didn't, for those who don't know what doxing is, it's when they share personal information. You know, the reason I didn't is because I have a common name, and my Twitter was private at that point. But yeah, like it would, to me, what was scary was the velocity at which it happened for something innocuous, like, hey, I put a hashtag basketball, like. So I can't imagine like what Carney got. I also wonder sometimes when you look at like the job postings for these social media positions, how little sometimes they are paid in some sports teams, and you're going, okay, well, who's going to take this? Are they trained? Like, what you put out on social media can have a great impact. And I think this is an area where we sometimes don't talk about, like, how should we be trained to deal with social media. There's very little of this out at the moment.
Mm.
We are coming towards the end of the show, but I did just want to ask a little bit about the journalism side. Obviously, Ashlea's up and coming with that side of things, and I just wanted to kind of ask Catherine, maybe like just give Ashlea a bit of advice. And I suppose there's no right or wrong answer here, but I know we were discussing it, Catherine, a couple of nights ago about what kind of articles sell, and it might be like the wrong kind of thing. And it reminds me of the debate that we just had regarding players coming on to punditry. You know, people tune in to watch these players, not because they might be the best pundits, but that you know, they'll get people watching them. And I guess that's the same as like articles as well. You might have a fantastic career, you might have all the degrees in the world, but if you don't talk about something that's really important, then you're not going to get the views, are you? You're not going to get the clicks. Catherine, just what's your thoughts kind of on that kind of situation?
I mean, I can say that covering the women's game at the moment, one of the, I don't know, saddenings, but like analyzing and doing match previews and doing match coverage sometimes just doesn't bring in the views to cover what you need to actually get paid, if that makes any sense. And I mean, it can be hit or miss what'll pick up or not, but often what picks up tends to be more controversial topics, or that can be disconcerting. So it's trying to find a way to get the balance of properly covering the sport while at the same time finding the information that people will come and gravitate to and read, and while at the same time staying true to yourself. If you want to be a journalist, that I don't want to do speculative work personally, but like, you know, so it's trying to find your audience, I find, is the most difficult part at the moment for women's journalism, because the audience that is there doesn't necessarily read the things that you would think they would be interested, such as match previews and stuff. Like, you have to go a lot further than that, and that can be a grind. It can be a lot of work to try to put all together. I don't know if that makes any sense. Try to concise like what could be a 2-hour topic in 30 seconds, but yeah.
Do you want to come in on that, Ashlea? Just your thoughts on what Catherine just said there?
To be fair, that's what, because I'm doing it at uni, my lecturer always told us before we do anything, just find something unique to me, something that I'm passionate about. So obviously while I'm studying, it's completely different from being in the world of work. And he just kind of told us for our blogs and things, just to find something that unique that we're passionate about to talk about. And like before, I did an article about the Karen Carney piece because it was something I'm passionate about, and because obviously it's something I want to go into, not probably the punditry side because I'm not an ex-player, but something like reporting or commentating or things like that. And then I actually spoke to Gabby Logan about it. She sent me a personalised video answering questions for me, and you could tell she was quite took back by it. And she's not really an ex-football player anyway. I think she was a gymnast, but like, she does a lot of reporting for Match of the Day and BBC and different BBC things, and you see her on the Women's Super League sometimes as well, and things like that. And to hear what she said about how even though you get these setbacks, it kind of makes you a better person in the end. Mm-hmm. And then I also did another piece about how the roles for female football journalists has changed from like about the 1970s to now. I spoke to Dame Julie Welsh. I don't know if any of you would have heard of her. But I did like a really long interview with her, and she told me about what it was like when she started and what it changed into. And it kind of shocked me how bad we actually were treated in 1970s to 80s. Because she said when she first started, it was because one of her male reporters had left, and she said, why not just chuck me in to give me a go? And then she ended up becoming a permanent thing. But she said she retired just before, or she stopped doing things just before social media became a thing. And she said she was so glad that she's not involved too much now where social media is a thing, because she said she would have been abused constantly and things like that. And then I remember you mentioned about role models at the start. Obviously, I look up to people like Gabby Logan and Laura Woods and people like that on Sky Sports, and I think they're amazing people. But the girl who I actually spoke to for my article, Chloe Streak, her name is. She's just got a job at Sky a few weeks ago after I'd spoke to her. But she kind of stood out as a role model for me because she's my age, 20 years of age, and she's already got a job at Sky. And she worked at Binfield FC, a team that made it to Wembley a few years ago. And she was the only woman in the press box, but the only woman involved in the whole team. And that was just a moment for me that's like, if I can aspire to be that good in a few years' time, working for Sky, being at Wembley. And she did a thing when Karen Carney got abused that stood out as well. So she put out a tweet saying all the good things about Karen Carney and listed like a load of things that Karen's done good. So obviously as a player, she was a very, very good player for Birmingham, Chelsea. And then she listed all the good things she does as a pundit and reporter. But she got a load of abuse, like go back to the kitchen, you don't have a say in all of this and things. And she did delete the tweet eventually. But she said if there was one thing she could say to anybody, and I feel like I should get it out too, is don't give up on, even if you don't want to be a sports journalist, referee, female, whatever. I think any female, just don't give up on what you want to do, because there's times when I've been wanting to give up because I thought, what's the point of going into a career if I'm going to get abused? But I think you just have to accept now, the society we're in, we're going to get abused if you're a woman, more so than a man. Men do get abused as well. And then, so I'm just thinking, just don't give up. And that's probably my role model overall is Chloe, who I haven't even met in person, who I can say, I'm going to look up to her and aim to be as good as you in a few years' time.
Go on, Andy. Do you want to end the show? Because
can I add something? Like, there's no doubt that more women are in every aspect of sport, from the medical to the journalism, that more women are needed. You know, like the abuse has always been there. It is arguably still there. It's just shifted from literally being direct, where people felt empowered that they could say it to your face when you were the only woman, to being more online now. But at the end of the day, like what I was told was like, it's your work that's going to stand. That's like, if you can do the job and you can show up, it doesn't matter if you're the only girl or woman in the room. Sorry. Like it's what you do that will stand the test of time, and that will keep bringing you forward. So it's just focusing on the work, focusing that you're doing things that are true to what you want to do, and just trying to keep learning and growing in every direction, I think is the best way.
Yeah, I think obviously we've tried tonight to give you guys more of the voice, because obviously that I think, you know, it can be a thing that sometimes can be left out of the discussion, isn't it? At the end of the day, I mean, I would say that, no offense, John, the majority of my friends that I look up to and are also inspire me are women. And I just think it's quite interesting to try and do a full circle element here. Obviously, women's football was banned by the FA in 1921. It was a 15-minute meeting, an all-male, I assume straight, an all-straight cis male meeting. And the grounds that were written into the minutes was that the game of football is quite unsuitable for females and ought not to be encouraged. That's the direct quote that was written into the official minutes of the meeting that banned it all the way up to 1971.
And this was after they had worked in factories where they were with toxic materials and got their arms.
And sometimes I think we've met people on Twitter and in real life that possibly sound like they wrote those words. But I think hopefully one of the things that we can all show and prove is that I think there's probably nothing more wrong than that statement in football and in all aspects of life, really.
Can I just add one last thing? Like, we've talked a lot about women entering into it, but I think we also need to talk about balance. Like, as important as it is to have more women within both, speaking about the men's and the women's game, I don't think we should be pushing men out of areas where, like, for example, if you look at this channel, some of the most enthusiastic and knowledgeable people that have spoken about Man United women are men. And we need more of that. So I think as much as we need to increase the access that women have to this very male dominated area of society, we also need to be truthful, to work on balance and having proper representation from everybody.
Thank you for a fantastic show tonight. Something completely different to what we used to host in here. But I think Ashley's kind of article inspired me. And thank you for coming on, Ashley. Really appreciate it. Hope you enjoyed it.
I did. Thank you for having me as well. I'm grateful for the opportunity and the experience to help me get better as well. So
yeah, awesome. I'm sure we'll see each other at games with the Beach Stourbridge as well, and I'm sure we'll cross paths and come back on the show again throughout the year. Absolutely. Catherine, thank you for coming back on. Really appreciate it. Yeah, love having you on. I'm usually watching you in that, to be honest. That's usually the show where I see you. I'm usually watching you more than hosting you. But thank you.
That's in Jamaica right now, so
yeah,
I'm very happy you invited me on.
And there's something different tonight, something a bit more of a serious topic to what we're used to. But I know you were the best person for the job on this one, so thank you, Andy. Great job.
Yeah, I've enjoyed it, and I think it's always good to have these conversations. And yeah, obviously I'm back on Friday with the fans forum, so we'll see what happens there.
Absolutely. Tomorrow night, obviously, as Catherine says, Natalie's still on holiday, but she's back, I think, ready for next week. I'm at work, so I'm Matt's hosting the Thursday show, so tune in to Matt there. Saturday Night Live as usual with Matt and Ben, and then we've got game day as well. Game content on Saturday, isn't it, this week? So we're playing on Saturday, so that confused me. So yeah, there'll be a lot of content on Saturday, and then obviously I'll be at Stourbridge on Sunday, so look out for our Twitter page there. So plenty to be watching. But thank you for a great show. Really appreciate you guys coming on tonight, and thank you to everybody in the comments. See you very soon.